My name's Charlie Thomas. I'm the Deputy CEO of the National Farmers Federation, and just getting proceedings started today so that we can hand over to our actual experts on the subject matter. But this is an issue that's increasingly of interest to the NFF as our farms become more digitised and we become more reliant on technology and connectivity and connected devices. Just thinking about how we protect ourselves and stay safe online. We often talk about, agriculture's a $90 billion industry. If we were a $90 billion company, we would have a whole team of IT and cybersecurity experts thinking about these things around the clock. But given we are primarily small family-owned businesses, we don't have the same focus and the same resourcing on cybersecurity, but we are exactly as affected by it as anyone else. So as an industry association, that's something the NFF is trying to just help our members overcome and help industry just become a bit more sophisticated, I suppose, in how it's thinking about cyber challenges both now and into the future. And that's sort of the structure of our agenda today. We're going to hear first from Kristen Coggan from the Regional Tech Hub, who's going to talk to us about the absolute basics of what we should be thinking about right in the here and now in terms of keeping safe, staying safe online and protecting ourselves and our data. We're then going to hand over to Robin Doss from Deakin University, Professor Robin Doss, I should say, who's going to talk to us a bit more about looking further over the horizon in terms of threats and challenges that are coming as digital adoption and technology evolves. And then we're going to hear from Gabby Seregra, who's our data policy manager at the NFF, who's going to talk to us about some work that we've been doing on an initiative that we call our Farm Data Code and the role that can play in helping keep your farm data safe in the digital age as well. I should have acknowledged at the outset as well, I'm dialing in from Melbourne from Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to any Indigenous people who might be joining us on today's webinar. So with that, I will hand over to you, Kristen. So Kristen is our Comms and Engagement Manager at the Regional Tech Hub, and I'm sure she can explain to you a bit more about what the Regional Tech Hub is as she gets into her preso.
Okay, is my screen sharing?
Sure is.
Righto. So hi everyone, I'm Kristen. I work for the Regional Tech Hub and I am based in Toowoomba today in Queensland. So these guys asked me to speak to you about the basics of safeguarding your farm digital data, and it's the same principles for everything, for personal, small business, that sort of thing from at this level. I'm probably going to be talking about things that you are already aware of. So hopefully that'll just reinforce some of those things that you may already be aware of or have forgotten about. And hopefully you'll get one or two red hot tips that maybe you weren't aware of. So we'll get into it. Basics, of course, passwords. Everyone talks about passwords and they're the bane of everybody's existence. But you need to create strong passwords. So the idea at the moment is to make passphrases. So there's an example of one there, which is capital I, lowercase w, 2, capital P, I, 16. So it stands for I went to Paris in 2016. My life's not that exciting that I can make those sorts of passphrases for, and I actually find them quite confusing. So I tend to use a password manager. And through my presentation, you'll see QR codes. They will link you to specific web pages from the eSafety Commission that talk specifically about those topics, but at the end there's another one that takes you to the homepage, and it's a great source of information on this subject and many others. So feel free to scan those and bookmark those pages if you like. So I like to use a password manager. Most of you will have come across them. Safari has them, Chrome has them, Edge has them. And it's where you get prompted when you're logging into something if you want it to remember your password. And even better, it can create strong passwords for you. I tend to use that. I find that is easy for me. I know where they are if I need to go back and find them, but I don't need to remember them. Another thing is, we were all told early back in the days, don't write down your passwords, don't write down your PIN codes, don't do those sorts of things. actually they're saying now that you possibly can. You can. So my mum and dad, we have it all written down, their passcodes, and I know where they are. I know where that is. I keep that list on me. So if someone breaks into their house, they're not going to find it. But that's not what they're looking for these days. So if it is to have, you're better off writing it down to have effective passwords rather than keeping something simple and using the same password for every website, which is what I'm inclined to want to do, to remember them. So password managers are an option for people. Don't share more information than you need to. So social media sites like Facebook, we all are on there. Well, we're not all on there, but we like to be on there. I like to be on Facebook for lots of different reasons, but the main reason is connecting with family and friends. So make sure that your profile is set to really tight security, and you can do that by going into the settings and having a look at that. And it's a really good idea to check it regularly, because sometimes when Facebook does an update or your device does an update, those settings can be automatically reset to a default setting. So it's a great idea to check that sort of thing regularly. Be mindful what you put on these things. You know, it's lovely if you're in Paris in 2016, you would have wanted to post all your photos of your fantastic holiday. But if you don't have your privacy settings set well, that's telling everybody that you're out of the country and your place is vacant. So that's especially on farms where it's, you know, if they find out that you're away, it's easy to come in and they have access, free for all access to a lot of different things there. So, and different details like your birth dates and your addresses and that sort of thing. So normally I'm out on a property out near Condamine. If I have to say anything anywhere, I say I'm near Condamine. I don't actually say the name of the property or exactly where it is. And don't use those social media accounts to log into another site. So sometimes you'll click on a link in your Facebook feed, for example, that's going to take you to some information or an article that you want to read, and it will want you to log in. And you will give you the opportunity to log in just using your Facebook. It's just one click and you're in. Try not to do that. That opens that Facebook account up to more vulnerabilities, I guess. So try and use an email address instead. And I have a particular email address that is just used for that. So it's not linked to anything else. It doesn't interfere with my important emails. It's just for that sort of thing. So that's one way to keep that to the side. Scams, there's all sorts of scams. As you know, there's romance scams, there's so many different types of scams. But one of the big one that we see a lot is these phishing scams. And this is where they're phishing for your information. And it will be one of the text messages that we all get. You know, your Australia Post is trying to contact you because your delivery couldn't be made. Click on this link. Your Link toll account is overdue or you haven't paid it. Click on this link. All those sorts of things. Don't click on the links, okay? So they're trying to trick you into clicking on the links because you think that something important is about to happen. They'll usually tend to put a sense of urgency around the messaging too. So at the moment with end of financial year, I got one apparently from the ATO the other day that was I needed to click on this link because they had a question about my refund. Now, number one, I know I'm probably not going to get a refund. And number two, the ATO is not going to ask me to click on a link through a text message. So you just need to be really aware of those things. And yeah, if you are in doubt and you're thinking, oh, is it real? Is it not real? Ring the organisation themselves. Get online and Google their phone number separately to that message and ring them and ask them. Okay, and they will be able to tell you whether that's them being genuine or it's not. And it's better to be safe than sorry, I suspect. So just be really wary of those things. And it's easy to do. You can just be busy and it just catches you and you think, oh yeah, bang. Phone calls are another thing. I had NBN the other day ringing me because apparently they know that there's upgrades in my area and they want to see if I can get one. I know NBN will never ring me and ask for that. But the scammers are using as there is upgrades happening in lots of regions across Australia. So it could come across as, you know, is this legit? Is this not? So yeah, don't do it and call the organisation instead. Now you can switch to a private web browser. So some web browsers like Google and Bing and Safari and Chrome, they are tracking your activity online so that they can fill your feed up and fill your advertising up with things that you will likely be interested in. So they're tracking you. Now, some people like that. I don't mind it actually, because it saves me a lot of time having to go to search for things. But if you don't like it, you can use on Chrome, you can go incognito. It's up in the bar up the top on the right-hand side, or in Safari, you can, I think it's called private, or you could use search engines like DuckDuckGo and Ecosia. That's just a few of them. There's more website where they don't track your activity and they don't sell your data to advertisers. Okay, so, and when you're out of it, you close it down, it permanently deletes your search history. So that's handy to know. Updating your software. Computers and phone manufacturers continually are fixing bugs and security vulnerabilities. Okay, so as fast as hackers can hack into something, these guys are updating their systems, and this is why you need to update your software. Just keeps it nice and tight and closed. It's really important to do it as soon as possible. Sometimes your software wants to update when you're in the middle of, say, a presentation online, and you can't do it then, but don't forget it, you need to do it. And using secure connections. So these are those public Wi-Fi's that you can jump onto when you're at an airport or at McDonald's or those sorts of things. They're okay if you're just streaming or surfing the web, that sort of thing, but don't use them for personal things like your banking or emailing, that sort of stuff. So as someone who travels for work a lot, I hotspot from my phone. So I'm using my connection, not the public Wi-Fi connection. It just has more vulnerabilities and it's easier for people to get your information from that. Data breaches. So we've heard that term thrown around. It's when big organisations have been hacked and there's a breach of their data, and those organisations contain our information. And if people can get that information and take that and sell it on the dark web or whatever they want to do with it, that's all about identity theft. And if somebody can steal your identity, then they can open up bank accounts in your name, take out loans in your name, get a new phone in your name, that sort of thing. So a really good example of that, I think it was the Optus breach a few years ago, where even if you didn't have Optus anymore, but you'd had an Optus account 10, 12 years ago, they were storing still all your information. So your license number is one bit of important information. It's one part of the jigsaw puzzle that makes up your identity. So the recommendations that came out of that was to renew your license and change that number. And state governments at that point, if I remember correctly, had a program where you could do that for no cost. So if you change your license number, then that form of ID is invalid for anybody who wants to use it. So thereafter, that sort of thing, your Medicare numbers, all that stuff that we need to use and give out so much when we're verifying our identity to these organisations, that's what they're after. So that's what you need to be aware of with that stuff. How do you know if you've been impacted by a data breach? Generally, organisations they're required by law to reach out and let you know. So that could be in an email or a text message or a phone call. If they can't get onto you and can't get onto people, generally they'll put it then in the media. So you will also find out that way. I know with my password manager, we were speaking about those before with the iCloud keychain, there's a function in that where I can check what email accounts I have that could have been involved in a data breach. So then you can go back and change passwords and be aware of that sort of stuff. This is the thing that's, there's nothing really you can do about this other than having those secure passwords, having two-factor authentication, those sorts of things. But if it does happen to you, there's where you could go to reach out and find some help is at ID Care. So this is a organisation, and I've used them with people, guided people to them and stepped through it with them. They're so helpful and so practical on giving you support if you have been part of a data breach or if you have a problem. And they'll walk you through everything step by step of what you need to do to secure your details, and then how to get back what you may have lost or that sort of thing. So they are super helpful. I can't stress enough how handy they are. And when you're in a panic, it's so good to know where you can go, because when you're panicking, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? It's hard to pull that all together. So there's lots of help with these guys. The other thing, if you think that you have given somebody accidentally access remotely to your computer and you think, oh, holy dooly, I didn't mean to do that. What do I do now? Unplug it straight from the wall, pull the power source out. If your computer's not working and it's not connected to the internet, they cannot do anything. So sometimes, especially older people, do get caught out on that, because Microsoft or somebody will ring them and say they need to check their computer for viruses or anything like that. And it's, again, you're just caught off guard. It can happen. So if that's the case, pull the plug, take the power away. So that was a lot of information given to you in one foul swoop. But this will be shared, like Charlie said, it's being recorded. People can share it. There's the website there for the Be Connected eSafety site. It is such a wealth of knowledge. I can't stress enough how great it is. It's easy to understand. It's simple, and it's a great place to go to get the baseline and understanding of all things digital. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was really helpful. We are going to have some time for questions at the end. So please, if you've got questions as people are speaking, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I'm sure our presenters might even be able to chat back to you, or if we haven't done that, we will come back to them in the final session. I'm going to keep going now and pass over to Professor Robin Doss from the Deakin University Centre for Cybersecurity. Robin's been a great supporter of the NFF and worked closely with us on our farm data code work, which Gabby will speak to after him, but that's not the topic of his presentation today. It's more about cyber, so I'll hand over to you, Robin, to get started.
Great. Thanks, Charlie, and thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, I'm just going to follow on from Kristen's presentation to talk a little bit about what's perhaps more into the future than here and now. So Kristen's presentation focused more in terms of what might be good practice or safe practice from an individual perspective, as well as from an organizational perspective as well, to address perhaps some well-known threats and attack vectors that adversaries use. But as Charlie mentioned at the start, farms now are adopting technology at a rapid rate. And with that technology adoption, obviously there's huge benefits from a functionality perspective or an efficiency perspective. But what might be some of the challenges and risks that might accompany that adoption from a cyber perspective? So that's essentially the focus that I want to bring to this discussion. So over the next few minutes, I'll focus a little bit on some emerging tech and sort of highlight some of the risks that they might present. But I want to start with this quote from the International Monetary Foundation that goes back to March 2021, but it makes a point that cyber incidents, or if you have been impacted by a cyber incident or a cyber attack, that it has significant impact on an organization. But the most important aspect or takeaway for me from that quote is the last few words, which is it's no longer a question of if, but when we talk about the threat landscape and when we talk about cyber incidents. So it's really about preparedness, and it's also about resiliency as well. So it's about being prepared so that you can mitigate the impact of a cyber incident, but also having resiliency so that you can recover quickly from a cyber incident as well and continue with business as usual or providing services and ensuring that your functions as an organization or as a farm can go forward unimpacted. In terms of technology, there's a plethora of technologies that are emerging, that are being adopted. So that's my attempt at a word cloud to capture some of the technologies that are currently being adopted. So, you'll see words like blockchain, IoT, Internet of Things, machine learning, drones, autonomous vehicles, robotics, whether that might be in the farm or in the warehouse, across the supply chain. All of these, obviously, digital twins, all of these obviously present significant efficiencies and benefits. But they also do something in cyber terms, which we term as increasing the attack surface. So whether it's a technology, whether it's a device, whether it's a service, a piece of software that's automating things, or a piece of firmware that's driving a robot, for instance, or an app that is giving you visibility across what's happening in the farm. All of these create potential entry doors or pathways for adversaries to compromise and steal information, data, impact on systems and infrastructure that might be deployed in the farm. So increased attack surface, what we mean by that is it provides an increased opportunity for an adversary to exploit the growing number of interconnected devices or services or technology that might be deployed, because each of these come with their own vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities can be exploited by an adversary, and these might be potential entry points for deployment of malware or data breaches or anything else that we can think of from a cyber incident perspective. Now, these adversaries as well come in different shapes and sizes, literally speaking as well, in terms of their sophistication, in terms of their capability, as well as in terms of their motivation as well. So in terms of threat actors, we have threat actors all the way from nation states, and one of those has been in the news just this month, APT40 from China, looking at who undertake reconnaissance activity across different infrastructures in Australia and across the world as well, and carry out cyber attacks with a very high level of sophistication and speed as well, from when a vulnerability is identified to when an attempt to exploit that vulnerability is actually carried out as well. So you have nation state actors at the very top, if you like, in terms of the highest level of sophistication. Then you have cyber criminals, cyber crime, unfortunately, is an organized criminal activity these days. They have business models, they have different actors that play different roles as part of that organized activity as well. And then you have hacktivists, and all the way down you have insider threats as well. And that's something that sometimes we forget about, that the threat can be internal. It can be as simple as a disgruntled employee that has a bone to pick, for instance, and that might lead to significant damage from as a result of a cyber incident, where they might use their credentials to steal information or divulge information, IP, and so on. Now, the impact of a cyber incident, we hear about data breaches quite a lot, but in terms of the impact of a cyber incident, it can go beyond that as well. So yes, there can be loss of confidential data and IP, personally identifiable information, but also sensitive information as well. It can also lead to malfunction of systems that might be quite important and significant when it comes to farm activity. So it could be automation systems, or it could be irrigation systems, and so on. It could also be unavailability of services that you're depending upon, and this could be on-farm services, could be cloud services, could be payroll services, and so on. Broader than that could be reputational impact. Obviously, could lead to financial loss as well. Things like ransomware is a critical example, but also a compromise of credentials when it comes to financial applications and systems as well. And one last aspect of cyber harms that, again, perhaps is overlooked is the psychological harm of being a victim of a cyber incident as well. And that can be quite significant, and it could be a flow-on effect from a lot of the other impacts of cyber incidents that I referred to as well. So we have opportunity for adversaries, if you like, with the adoption of technology. Then we have their own motivations and incentives, which might range from geopolitical motivations through to financial gain. And all of this presents a threat landscape that we need to be really responsive to, and a threat landscape that is constantly evolving and dynamic as well, which requires the cybersecurity posture that we adopt within our farms to be responsive as well. But in terms of specific technologies and the adoption of these technologies and the risks that they bring. Some of those technologies I've listed here are probably not a exhaustive list, but we're all familiar with IoT and smart devices that are adopted on farms quite widely these days, extensively. And all of these devices are essentially off-the-shelf devices. They prioritize cost and functionality over security. So they're not essentially adopting best security practice in their design. And what this means is when they're deployed, they come with those inbuilt vulnerabilities as well. A lot of them depend on software updates as well. And again, if these software updates are not done, they present vulnerabilities as well. And we're talking about huge scale here. So, we're now told there's about, in excess of 50 billion IoT devices deployed across the world. So, so these create significant vulnerabilities when they're deployed as part of a critical business activity as well, and it presents a backdoor or an entry door for an adversary. Automation can bring significant benefits, adoption of AI and machine learning. Everybody's doing it in every industry sector. But sometimes what we forget is these AI models and machine learning models, which can give us significant benefits, can also be compromised as well. And then this can lead to data breaches where personal or sensitive information that's been used to train these models to provide predictive functionality or classification functionality. These models can be compromised and that data can be stolen as well. And therefore, it's important that when we're making use of these AI and ML services, which obviously in most instances, if not always, come from external service providers, that we are confident of their security within their AI infrastructure as well. Exploitation of the software supply chain is probably the #1 threat that everybody is talking about at the moment. And what this means is we no longer operate in isolation. We are dependent on multiple service providers, multiple software vendors, whether it's for security purposes or just applications as well. And these interdependencies then create cascading effects if one of those pieces of software has a vulnerability. And by exploiting that individual piece of software, an adversary can gain access to other systems and applications and infrastructure that might be powering a farm, for instance. Compromise of the blockchain. Everybody thinks if you're using the blockchain, you're secure by default, and that's not necessarily the case. The blockchain can provide significant benefits from a data sharing perspective, provide traceability, which can be quite, and data integrity, which can be quite beneficial as well. But blockchain, again, is powered by different pieces of software, by different cryptographic functionality, and each of these can create vulnerabilities on their own. A classic example is smart contracts that help us to automate things, whether that might be micropayments, for instance. But smart contracts themselves can be compromised because they're a piece of software, essentially code. If there are software bugs in a smart contract that you're depending upon, then that can be exploited by an adversary as well. So again, aspects around software engineering best practice, secure coding, all of those contribute significantly here as well. Cloud infrastructure, again, just because you're using the cloud doesn't mean you're secure by default. A classic example or threats or compromise of cloud infrastructure occurs from misconfigurations, misuse of credentials, or use of unsafe credentials and so on. So it almost goes back to Kirsten's comments around using safe passwords, but that applies to the cloud as well. If you have weak passwords to your cloud native applications, then that creates significant vulnerabilities as well. Ransomware, I'm sure everybody's familiar with, but ransomware continues to be a significant threat. But in order for a ransomware incident or for you to be impacted by ransomware, an adversary needs to first gain access into your systems and infrastructure. And therefore, the entry point is much earlier than the deployment of the ransomware. So how can we make sure that those opportunities are minimized and mitigated are significant considerations that we need to take into account. Deepfakes. Just earlier this year, we had an incident in Hong Kong where Using deepfake technology, an accountant was convinced to transfer $25 million to scammers. The accountant did his due diligence. He didn't just depend on an email or a phone call. He said he wanted to have a video call, and therefore they had a Zoom call. But everybody on the Zoom call was deepfaked individuals of people that the accountant had confidence in. So that's the level of sophistication that adversaries are dealing with. Quantum threats, probably looking way further into the future, but adversaries are looking at harvesting information now that they cannot decrypt with current technology, but they will be able to decrypt into the future. So the adoption of cryptographic and encryption schemes that are post-quantum safe is something, again, that we are considering about. 5G connectivity would give us greater efficiency, greater bandwidth, greater capacity to do things and move data at scales that we haven't been able to do before and give us efficiencies. But again, with 5G, there comes risks as well, especially with the intersection of 5G and IoT, which is what I refer to as hybrid threats, where adversaries are not necessarily looking at one avenue or one technology to compromise, but they're actually looking at the intersection of multiple technologies, which gives them a significant advantage as well. And I'll finish with the last one, but probably this is where we should all start, in a sense, the social engineering component or the human component. And this is where things like security education training, awareness of employees, best practice, all of these are critical as well. So yes, there's significant movement when it comes to emerging technologies and the threats and risks and challenges that accompany those from a cybersecurity perspective. But sometimes it's also the human element that can provide a lot of mitigation and protection against those emerging threats as well. So I will stop there and hand over to Gabby.
Thanks, Robin. Having successfully scared the daylights out of us, Gabby can now maybe elaborate a bit on how, because obviously this is all really complicated. So how do we as individuals understand which systems we can and can't interact with safely? And that's kind of where the data code and the work that Gabby's doing come in. So I'll hand over to you, Gabby.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm scared too. That was very eye-opening. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, there's a lot that, yeah, as technology progresses, there's more and more for us to think about. So we've had lots of good advice. Thank you from Kristen and Robin today. And I want to extend the data safety topic to data sharing and also how NFF can help farmers protect and control their data when they are willingly sharing it. So we've talked a lot about unauthorized access by hackers, for example, but also sometimes we choose to share our data, and it's what are the circumstances under which we do that to make sure that we're staying safe. Okay, so the first important point that I want to make is that farm data is in fact very valuable and should be protected, but it should also be shared for farmers and in the industry's benefit. So a couple of examples here. I'm sure all our farmers listening to this have got different technologies on their farms. What's available these days is pretty mind-blowing. Here are a couple of examples that we've got, making yield predictions based on soil condition, the detection of weeds using a camera, and now artificial intelligence as well. Yeah, it's quite incredible, the advances that have now been applied in farming. And technology is able to provide farmers with very rich information. And so that rich information comes from you inputting some basic data or that data coming from sensors, which is then usually analyzed by an algorithm, and then what you get at the other end of that is predictions or usable insights. So you kind of got this transformation of raw data to some usable information. And especially artificial intelligence needs volumes of data in order to provide more accurate information, because that's how it learns. So we actually need to share and feed data into these systems to get better and better and more accurate predictions and insights. And similarly, when data is aggregated from many farms, it can be used to create more generalized predictions. And, some examples of that are weather, soil conditions, animal traits. The more data we have from across many farms, the better those predictions can be. So farm data is definitely very valuable, not just for one farm, but across many farms. And we need it to be shared to produce better information. However, of course, there are risks with data sharing, and I hope not to scare you as much as Robin's presentation did, but there are definitely things that we can also do about it. So let's have a look at some of the risks first. Data breaches, we've already heard about a lot, definitely on the rise, and especially with cloud services, because effectively we used to have our data on a computer under a desk, and now we're handing it off to a third party, like a cloud hosting service, where that data is out of our hands, and we can't control it anymore as much as we used to. And the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner has been getting an increasing number of data breach notifications, and most of those result from a cloud or software provider. Another risk is having data accidentally sometimes or deliberately misused, and that can affect farmers. That often happens when data sets are combined, because then new information can be created. One example was this US-based company called AgriStats, who are compiling reports for meat processors, and those reports contain sales prices and farmer compensation. And in the alleged lawsuit brought by the US Department of Justice, AgriStats understood that meat processors use these reports for anti-competitive purposes, and in some instances encourage meat processors to raise prices and reduce supply. Another risk is, again, something Kristen raised before, was being really careful about where you're putting your farm information, because it can be aggregated and compiled into data sets like the Farm Transparency Map, and then published online to be used by groups to target farms for political purposes. So I think we see some of that in Australia, for sure. Another risk is that your data could be sent overseas through an acquisition. And given that the Australian market for agricultural technology is relatively small, and the goal for many Australian startups is to partner with or to be acquired by international companies, that the risk that exists for Australian farmers is that when those acquisitions happen, that Australian farm data can now be seen by some of these international partners or companies, and often their affiliates as well. And of course, we know that terms and conditions are very complex to read. So when you are using some software or services that we are inputting your data, some of the terms and conditions are just too lengthy and too complex, written in legal language that is difficult to understand for us to be able to comprehend, even if we have the time to read through them completely. And the report from the ACCC says that it would take about 46 hours a month to read every privacy policy in full that we encounter even just with average use of mobile phones. So I can't imagine farmers have a lot of time to do that. And also, even if they did, we wouldn't expect them to be able to read some of these really lengthy and complicated terms and conditions. And even if you do find the time to read the terms and conditions and the privacy policies, a lot of them, because they're written by the service providers, are actually written in their favour. So here's an example of a clause which gives the provider the right to use your information for basically any purpose in any manner that they wish. So what can we do? It's not all doom and gloom. You can definitely still share your data and protect it at the same time. So I'll go through a couple of those things now. Firstly, keep your data, be aware of what you're sharing, keep it as private as possible. Specifically, if you want to keep off some of these public data sets, don't share your farm address on social media websites or use a business address or maybe a general location like just a suburb or the nearest town. As Kristen mentioned, keep checking your social media privacy settings because they do change, and also educate your staff to do the same. So it's a team effort. Everyone needs to be aware of the risks. If you do have a website and use a domain, there are some protection services available that you can use. You can also request to be removed from some online directories. Check if your property records can be anonymized. And yes, unfortunately, do read the service provider's terms and conditions where you can. To help with that, so we've got a program and a code of conduct called the Australian Farm Data Code, which has been developed with farmers and industry experts. And that is a code of conduct that sets out how farm data should be managed. It's a blueprint for service providers to use to design their products, projects, and services. And it tells them how they should handle farm data. So the goal of the code is to actually promote innovation. It's not to stop the sharing of data, it's to make sure that it is done in a safe way. And anyone collecting farm data, such as service providers, software providers, research projects, can all get certified under the code. So we have a certification program, and that will allow them to prove to farmers that they are following the code, and that is checked by the NFF as well. So a little bit more about the certification in a minute. But first of all, I'll just go through the high-level principles that are contained in the Farm Data Code, which are, first of all, transparency, and that's about being transparent what is being done with farm data and being clear, getting clear and informed consent to the terms and conditions, and also making sure that they're in plain English as much as possible. Fairness is about ensuring farm data is not used against farmers and that they're getting value for sharing it. Control is about making sure farmers have control over how their data is shared, deleted, and de-identified. And portability makes sure that farmers can get a copy of their data, especially where there's going to be a change in ownership of the provider, such as an acquisition or even insolvency, and also upon service termination. So when you leave a service, you can get a copy of the data you've put in there. Security, so making sure that farm data is protected and secure, and also the data breaches are reported. And then compliance is about only ever disclosing farm data without farmers' permission if required by law. And apart from that, it should never be disclosed without permission. And so the benefits of the code and the certification for farmers are, if you can use the NFF's website to see which service providers are certified, and then you know who you can trust. And also in those certification audit reports, you can see a summary of the provider's terms and conditions. And then you can make informed decisions on the software or the project or the service that you're going to be signing up for. For service providers, it's an opportunity for you to create goodwill with farmers and differentiate your product. And if you're doing good things, which a lot of the organizations that have already signed up do, it's to prove that you are doing the right thing by the farmer. With certification, it is for a product, service, or project. So we don't certify entire organizations because often they have different product offerings with different terms and conditions. So that was an important distinction that we make. What we do is we review their terms and conditions and their data management policies. And based on that, we make an assessment of whether they comply with the code. The legal recourse for farmers is via the terms and conditions because that's a legal contract that you have. And so that's why we want to make sure the terms and conditions are in farmers' favour before you agree to them. Unfortunately, we don't check for product quality or the fairness of contracts in the general legal sense. We're just looking for the data components. But the audit report that we create is very much around data management practices. And providers do need to comply with the code 100% in order for them to get certified. But anyone can get assessed. And so with the assessment and the provider report, what you might sometimes see is that provider doesn't meet all the criteria in the code, which is fine. They just don't get the 100% certification. And we don't expect everyone to get 100% because we've actually set the standard quite high. It's above trends. It's not just about transparency. We've actually put in some minimum protections for farmers. But we do expect providers to at least participate, get assessed, and improve their practices over time, even if they're not getting 100% in the first place. Having said that, we have had quite a few of the providers that have been certified change their terms and conditions already to meet the code. So that's fantastic because it's already providing benefits to farmers. And so how can farmers help the NFF protect farm data and promote this program? So ask your service providers, your software providers, and your research project you work with, anyone else collecting data with you, ask them to get certified under the data code by the NFF, and go to the NFF website, use and share the audit reports that we've already published there. Tell others about the code, and also we'd love your feedback about the code. If there's anything you think that's missing, any protections that should be included, please let us know. And I've just got an example there on screen about what the register looks like. You can have a look at the companies that have been certified and assessed and look at their audit reports there. And finally, look for the certification logo. Some providers will claim that they actually follow the code and they've looked at it and adjusted their policies, but we can only really be sure if the NFF has actually gone through their terms and conditions and they've applied to be certified and we've assessed them properly. Thank you. So if you would like any other information about either how you can help us promote the code or actually get certified, if we've got any providers on the line, then please contact us on the farm data code at nff.org.au. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thanks so much for that, Gabby. A few different interesting perspectives there. So I've certainly got some questions, but if anyone else online does, please just use the chat function and drop in any questions you've got for our panel. We've got about 5 or 10 minutes just to run through a few questions. From me though, to get us started, Kristen, I was just thinking about your presentation and you talked a bit about the use of social media sign-ins, and the one that I think a lot of people use as well, but it probably falls into the same category as the Apple sign-ins. So rather than signing in with Facebook, you're signing in with Apple. Would that, I'm assuming because you're not creating a unique password, that would be in the same category? Is that your understanding?
No, it's not my understanding, but I'm not a professional on this. So, but I think it's different, and you can sign in with your Apple because it gives you the option when you're doing that to hide your email, which generates a random email address that Apple will link to you, but nobody else will know. So it does protect you in that space on that level. So I think it's a little bit different to signing in through a Facebook or something.
Okay. Makes me feel a little bit better because I do tick that.
Because I do that too.
Yeah. The other one that I was thinking about, and I don't know, Kristen, it might be you, it might be more for Robin, but the use of antivirus software, how recommended is that these days? I feel like it's less prevalent than it used to be, perhaps because the manufacturers are building more of that into their systems. Is it still something we should have?
I'll probably let Robin answer that, but because again, I'm no expert on that one, but I do have antivirus software as well, just to be double sure, because I would not like to be without it. And I also use a program on my phone as well.
Yeah, okay. Robin?
Yeah, Charlie, I think you can never be too safe in a sense, but I guess when you're using something like antivirus software, it really depends on how current its information database is for it to be effective, especially against emerging types and forms of malware, right? So yes, if someone's using antivirus software, encourage them to do so, but also encourage them to ensure that it's up to date, and as the vendor releases updates to the database, that they keep updating the software as well.
And I guess staying on the topic of antivirus software, because we all saw the world come crashing to a halt last week with the CrowdStrike. Well, it wasn't an attack, and that's kind of my question, is that was an example of a company trying to do the right thing and sort of failing. we've talked a lot about you talked a lot about malicious actors, Robin, and adversaries, but are there steps that we should be considering or taking to prevent those sort of accidental issues?
Absolutely. And the incident is quite interesting because from an impact perspective, it's no different to a cyber attack, right? So because it essentially is the equivalent of a denial of service attack, which makes unavailable systems that normally would be available for legitimate users of the system. So from an impact perspective, there's no real difference. Now, what was the reason for the incident? Essentially, it comes down to insufficient software testing, right? So before a patch, which we encourage everybody to ensure you're patched and up to date, and organizations are doing the right thing. So I guess the onus then is, especially if someone signed up to automated updates and patching, the onus is then on the provider to ensure that those patches and updates before they're rolled out have been sufficiently tested against all types of platforms and systems to ensure there's no adverse effect. So it goes back to, careful coding and testing practices, which, again, in the interest of functionality and speed of delivery, testing and security continues to be compromised, and that's perhaps the source of a lot of the problems that we're dealing with.
I'm interested as well, staying with you probably, Robin, that just in terms of automation, you mentioned automation in terms of AI and machine learning, but also just the automation of our physical machines. So we've, got a lot of development happening in terms of John Deere working on automated tractors and other manufacturers as well, obviously. Yep. I'm assuming that they will all be connected ultimately to a network and sort of being driven in real time through the cloud, which would surely be a huge vulnerability for us, say at harvest time, if we had all of our automated headers out there in the field. Absolutely. In a time-sensitive environment decades from now, if someone was able to get in and shut that system down, it would cost us a lot of money.
Absolutely.
What sort of work is happening now, I suppose, to think about that and protect us from those sorts of things?
Yes, I think it's sort of the way in which product development is occurring these days. There's sort of a shift, and one of those shifts is security by design. So previously, security used to be an afterthought. I think we're all realizing that no longer can be the case, especially as things become more interconnected. Then the exposure of those machinery, whether it's a tractor or anything else, to an adversary, and the opportunity that an adversary has increases significantly. So I guess it's about going back to ensuring that security is a consideration from the design stage, but then also from a deployment stage. It's security by default, ensuring that the configurations of these systems, devices, tractors, has the right security configurations by default, and it's not left to a farmer in our context to correctly configure that entity, whatever it might be, to ensure that it's got the right sets of privileges, right sets of services running. It's not talking to or has, doesn't have weak default passwords or password for every tractor being the same, which is admin 1234, those sorts of things. So it's not left to, in a sense, the customer, but it's actually secure by default as well. So I think those are two important principles that are being adopted. But then when we talk about interconnectivity as well, so again, the purpose of interconnectivity is data, and then it goes down to how is that data shared, how is it used, and is it in the best interest of the farmer? And that's where I guess the data code comes in as well. So one is the sort of physical entity, but then a lot of data is collected as well, and how is that data secured and shared and used, and all of those creates interesting questions as well.
Absolutely, thank you. And Gabby, so speaking of the data code, I'm curious just in terms of how this compares to what's being done overseas, because I understand we're not the first to embark on this, but if you're a product provider getting certified under the Australian code, is it radically different to what they might have to do overseas if they're in other markets too?
Yeah, sure. So the a lot of the principles are very similar to the European, US, and the New Zealand data codes. I think they've all learned off each other, which has been excellent. And I think the British Council has recently published one as well. The way that the certifications work, so not everyone has a certification on the Australia, New Zealand, and the US do at the moment. And they're come in at different levels. So the US one is really just transparency. So it asks you questions such as, do you have, do you share data with other third parties, or, do you sell the data? And then if you just need to say yes or no, but there's no kind of a minimum to say, well, that's bad or that's good, where that's what we've done in our code, is to say, well, it's actually not good enough if you don't, back up your customers' data, for example. If you don't provide them with a copy of it, that's not good enough. Where in the US one, you can just say, no, we don't provide a copy of your data, too bad if you're going to leave the service. So I think we've set the bar higher, but that is why we understand that it would take a lot longer for our Australian providers to, to meet the code fully, and it's a journey.
No, thank you. Well, in the absence of any other questions, we might wrap it up there, but thank you so much, Gabby, Robin, and Kristen, for taking the time to share your insights today, and to everyone who's tuned in to learn a bit more about how they can keep safe online. It's a conversation we're keen to keep going. So if anyone post the webinar has any further questions, we're happy to put you in touch with any of our panelists today, but also happy to host more of these sessions into the future. If there are specific topics or issues that you want us to deep dive into, happy to facilitate that and set that up. So thank you all. Have a really good rest of the day, and we'll speak again soon.